Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that nothing you relied on actually disappeared. Yet everything feels hollow. The buildings still stand. The roads still carry traffic. The screens still glow. But something essential is gone. The money in your account still has numbers, but no certainty. The job titles still exist, but no promise. The system still functions, but no longer makes sense. This is how collapses truly begin. Not with explosions, not with sirens, but with a quiet internal fracture, when belief erodes faster than infrastructure. For centuries, humanity has trusted a single idea above almost all others: that markets, competition, and growth would organize our lives better than kings, gods, or empires ever could. That capitalism was not just an economic system, but a rational evolution of human progress itself. And for a long time it appeared to work. Produced abundance where there was scarcity, technology where there was limitation, comfort where there was struggle. But beneath that success, something else was forming slowly, invisibly, like pressure building inside the earth before an earthquake. Because every system carries within it the seeds of its own undoing. And capitalism is no exception. At its core, capitalism is built on a simple promise. If individuals pursue their own self-interest, society as a whole will prosper. This idea, famously articulated by Adam Smith, suggested that human greed could be harnessed into something productive, even beneficial. But what happens when self-interest stops serving the collective? What happens when growth no longer creates stability, but instability? When efficiency erodes meaning? When success for the few requires exhaustion for the many? That is where we find ourselves now. The invisible hand no longer guides, it grips. Over the past decades, wealth has concentrated at a scale unseen in human history. Not because billions suddenly became less intelligent or less hardworking, but because ownership itself began to outperform labor. Capital stopped needing people. People, however, still needed capital. Wages stagnated while productivity soared. Housing transformed from shelter into speculative asset. Healthcare became a marketplace. Education became debt. The middle class, once the stabilizing pillar of capitalist societies, began to dissolve quietly. Not with a collapse, but with a slow bleed. People worked more hours than ever before, yet felt perpetually behind. They followed every rule they were taught, yet remained anxious, insecure, and replaceable. And still, the system told them this was freedom. But freedom without security is not freedom. It is exposure. Psychologists have long warned about what happens when economic systems reshape identity. Eric Fromm described modern society as one in which humans stop being and start having, where worth becomes transactional, conditional, and external. Under capitalism, you are valuable not because you exist, but because you produce. Not because you feel, but because you perform. Slowly, subtly, human beings became commodities. Resumes replaced identities. Metrics replaced meaning. And something inside us began to fracture. Depression rose. Anxiety surged. Loneliness became epidemic. Not because life became harder in material terms, but because it became emptier in existential ones. We were told that happiness could be purchased, optimized, upgraded. That fulfillment lived one promotion, one product, one milestone away. Yet the closer we chased it, the further it receded. This was not an accident. Capitalism does not thrive on satisfaction. It thrives on dissatisfaction. A content person is a dangerous person. They stop consuming, stop striving, stop feeding the machine. So contentment had to be reframed as laziness, rest as weakness, simplicity as failure, and desire became an industry. Sigmund Freud revealed that human behavior is driven largely by unconscious forces. Fears, longings, insecurities we barely understand ourselves. His nephew, Edward Bernays, realized those insights could be weaponized. Advertising stopped selling products and started selling identities. A car no longer transported you, it signaled status. Clothing no longer covered you, it defined you. Success no longer meant stability, it meant visibility. Consumption became a language through which we tried to prove our worth. But identity built on external validation is fragile. When markets crash, identities collapse. When careers falter, self-worth shatters. This is why economic downturns are not merely financial crises. They are psychological ones. Because capitalism did not just organize our economies. It colonized our minds. It taught us to measure time as money, life as productivity, people as resources. Even our passions were monetized. Even our rest was optimized. Even our grief was commodified. The gig economy promised freedom, but delivered precarity. Hustle culture promised empowerment, but produced burnout. We were told to be our own bosses. What we became instead was our own oppressors. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han describes modern society not as one ruled by external force, but by internalized pressure. We are no longer coerced. We self-exploit, and when we collapse, we blame ourselves. Not the system, not the structure, not the incentives, just us. This is perhaps capitalism's most powerful illusion, convincing individuals that structural failure is personal inadequacy. But cracks are now impossible to ignore. Housing markets inflate beyond reach. Student debt chains generations. Automation replaces labor faster than societies can adapt. Climate systems destabilize under endless extraction. And trust, the invisible glue of any system, evaporates. Trust in institutions, trust in corporations, trust in governments, trust in the future. History teaches us that systems do not collapse when they stop functioning. They collapse when people stop believing in them. Feudalism did not end because kings vanished overnight. It ended because people no longer accepted their place within it. Empires do not fall from invasion alone. They rot from internal contradiction. And capitalism is now facing its own. It demands infinite growth on a finite planet. It rewards accumulation over sustainability. It prioritizes profit over survival. These are not flaws that can be patched. They are design limits. No system built on endless expansion can coexist with ecological boundaries. No model that externalizes harm can sustain itself indefinitely. And so we reach the question that lingers beneath all others. If capitalism is collapsing, what comes next? To answer that, we must confront a deeper truth, one more unsettling than economic instability. Capitalism persists not because it works, but because we cannot imagine an alternative. Philosopher Slavoj Zizek once observed that it is easier for people to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Why? Because capitalism is no longer just an economy. It is a belief system, a mythology, a story about human nature itself. We are told humans are inherently greedy. That competition is natural. That hierarchy is inevitable. But anthropology tells a different story. For most of human history, societies were organized around reciprocity, mutual aid, and shared resources. Markets were tools, not identities. Profit was secondary to survival and cohesion. Greed was not celebrated. It was regulated. Only recently has accumulation become a virtue rather than a threat. David Graeber argued that modern economies are sustained by myths, stories that justify inequality and normalize suffering. Capitalism survives because we believe its narrative, even when it contradicts our lived experience. But myths do not last forever. When enough people feel the dissonance, when reality no longer aligns with the story, belief fractures. And that fracture is where transformation begins. Across the world, signs of something new are emerging. Communities experimenting with cooperative ownership. Movements demanding shorter workweeks and dignified labor. Young generations rejecting traditional definitions of success. Alternative metrics of value, well-being, sustainability, mental health begin to challenge GDP as the ultimate measure of progress. Universal basic income is debated not as utopia, but necessity. Degrowth is discussed not as regression but survival. These are not fantasies. They are responses. Because collapse is not merely destruction. It is revelation. It strips away illusion. It exposes what no longer works. It forces adaptation. Every major societal shift has emerged from breakdown. The fall of feudalism gave rise to democracy. The collapse of empires produced new forms of governance. Crisis has always been the midwife of evolution. And now, humanity faces a reckoning not just with an economic system, but with itself. Because the ultimate reason capitalism must collapse is not political, not economic, not even environmental. It is existential. Human consciousness is changing. Our capacity for empathy is expanding. Our awareness of interconnectedness is deepening. Our tolerance for dehumanization is eroding. The system that once harnessed human ambition can no longer contain human awareness. Capitalism requires hierarchy. Human consciousness is moving toward dignity. Capitalism requires scarcity. Human understanding is moving toward sufficiency. Capitalism requires competition. Human survival now requires cooperation. The shell is cracking because the organism inside has outgrown it. And what comes next will not arrive fully formed. It will be messy, uneven, contradictory. There will be fear, resistance, attempts to cling to what is familiar. But there will also be creativity, reconnection, reclamation. Change does not begin in parliaments or boardrooms. It begins in choices, choosing rest over burnout, presence over productivity, community over consumption. Choosing to measure life not by output, but by meaning. Revolution does not always wear banners. Sometimes it looks like refusing to live as a machine, teaching children that worth is not earned through exhaustion, building relationships that are not transactional, creating spaces where people matter more than profit. Capitalism collapses not when markets fail, but when people withdraw their belief. And that withdrawal has already begun. Quietly, individually, collectively. We are living in the space between stories. The old world is fading. The new one struggles to be born. This is uncomfortable, uncertain, necessary, because collapse is not the end of civilization. It is the end of a story that no longer serves us. And what replaces it will be written not by systems, but by people who finally remember that they were never meant to be cogs. They were meant to be creators, caretakers, participants in something larger than profit. The most powerful system in the world is not capitalism. It is the human heart once awakened, and that awakening has already begun.